and welcome to the Hillbilly Chicken Ranch. I'm Susan, your hostess, and we're in my kitchen today because we're going to be canning. March into Canning 25 is an open collaboration hosted by me, the Hillbilly Chicken Ranch. The official playlist is below if you decide you want to join this open collaboration. It ends March 31st. You need to use the hashtag, you need to tag my channel, and use the official playlist in your description box below that video. It's also March Canning Madness 25, hosted by Luann's Kitchen. Yes, she's got a closed collaboration, so I'm combining the two today. And if you're interested in her collaboration, she's still got a few spots open. All you have to do is email her, and I'll put the email in the description box below this video. So what are we doing today? We're going to make some homemade copycat Rotel or mock Rotel or tomatoes with green chilies, however you want to word it. And I'm going to be following a recipe card here, but I wanted to show you this. We have the USDA Complete Guide of Home Canning, and I think it's on 324. Yes, the recipe that they have in here is on 324. It's the only recipe book that I own that had a recipe for this type of tomato product for your pantry. But it's a small batch, and I got a lot of tomatoes over here, folks. I don't know how many pounds, I didn't even weigh it. But it would call for 3 cups of peeled, cored, chopped tomatoes, and it would yield 3 pints. And it is a water bath recipe. They would say hot pack pints for 15 minutes if you're under 1,000 feet. If you're under 6,000 feet, it would be 20 minutes, and if you're above 6,000 feet, it would be 25 minutes. The recipe I found, and there's several of them out there, folks, calls for 12 cups of tomatoes, and it can be paste or mixed, I'm telling you that, and that would equal about 6 to 7 pounds of tomatoes. 2 cans of mild chili peppers, and 1 to 2 jalapeno peppers, optional. Well, I'm actually going to skip those canned chilies, and I'm going to do the jalapenos in it, and I may just leave the seed in there. If you don't want the seeds in there, please de-seed all of your product before you start canning. It calls for 1 medium onion, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1/2 teaspoon of ground coriander, and it calls for lemon juice, 1 tablespoon per jar. It does not have vinegar in it. It does have the lemon juice that will bring your acid level up for water bath canning. You would use a 1/2-inch headspace on your jars, and you will water bath for 40 minutes for a pint. So this should cover all altitudes, and I think it's a great recipe. Now, my tomatoes are last year's tomatoes, and I stuck them in the freezer. This was the end of the year, and not all of them are completely ripe. They have blemishes on them. Put this into our jars, and we're going to get it canned. And I'm hoping to get a lot of jars out of this because we love Rotel. And y'all, what better way to use up some leftover last year tomatoes? Now, these are not all of our tomatoes that's in my freezer, but I've got a big bowl here. Probably about 25 pounds, maybe a little bit more, I don't know. But we're going to figure out how many pounds we have. We're going to get these done, and we're going to march into canning. Get that stuff out of the freezer and get it ready for garden season. Let's get to it. I decided not to roast these tomatoes because I had pulled them out of the freezer and I let them sit overnight, so they're not roasted. I also opted not to roast the jalapenos. Now, the recipe calls for 1 to 2 jalapenos, and I'm doubling the recipe. And I'm not using the canned green chili, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually double the amount of jalapeno peppers that I would put in, and that would be, instead of 4, would be 8. And I'm going to go grab 2 onions in a moment, and then we're going to get everything put together in the pot. So none of my peppers are big, but you do want to cap them. And because I can't wear rubber gloves, I will be washing my hands afterwards and get as much of the capsaicin off my hands as possible. So I'm going for a medium or large chili pepper, and I think what I'm going to do with these excess is I might just grind them up and put them in my freezer once I'm done with everything else. Put them back in the freezer, and that way they'll be ready to go. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and because they're smaller, I'm going to go 16 instead of, because usually you can get the long ones. These are kind of short. So I'm going to go 16 total of the shorter ones. Ten, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I'm doing it in the food processor. It's going to get loud. I'm going to start by chopping. And I'm going to go ahead and chop up some onion. It's overpowering the smell of those jalapenos, so I'm going to go ahead and chop up my onions and get them in there, and we'll be right back. All right, I pulled out another bag of tomatoes to make 24 cups of tomatoes. I had actually 22. I added a pint jar of tomatoes that I had in my pantry to get the 24 cups of tomatoes to double the recipe. I've added my jalapeno and onion to my pot. I haven't stirred it in yet, but I'm going to start with my spices. It calls for salt. I'm using Himalayan salt because I have some on hand, and it doesn't have, it's not iodized. It actually has minerals and stuff in there. And it's actually a very good salt for many different reasons. So I need 4 teaspoons of salt. Or 1 tablespoon and 3 teaspoons, however you want to do it. I need 2 teaspoons of black pepper. Two teaspoons of dry oregano. and 1 teaspoon of dry coriander, the powder. And that is all the seasonings except for the lemon juice that goes into your jars. We're going to give this a good stir, and we're going to get this simmering. Once it starts simmering, I can break down the tomatoes a little bit. We'll get it into the jars. But in the meantime, I'm going to get my jars sterilized. And there it is, folks. The beginnings of homemade copycat Rotel, or tomatoes with chilies, whichever way you want to call it. I am going to give this a little taste test just to make sure that I have enough seasoning in there. That's going to be spicy. Yum, yum. Okay, my jars have been sterilizing for 10 minutes. And Big Bertha, that's a Bollington tamale pot that has a rack in it, and it works perfectly for canning big batches. I'm going to put a tablespoon of lemon juice in each of my jars to get started. You can use citric acid. I'll put that in the recipe below, how much citric acid it is. Okay, I'm going to grab my funnel. Because I'm not organized today, folks. And we're going to get this ladled into our jars. We'll go ahead and turn the heat off on my Rotel. Always tamper those jars. Even though they've been in the big pot, a little bit of time that they're cooling off could be a difference in temperature, and I don't want my jars to bust. And we're to fill them to a 1/2 inch headspace. going to get my vinegar, I'm going to check my headspace, and we're going to get these sealed up. So this is the debubbler. The second tooth on here will be a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to debubble first. That's just inserting that in there and giving it a little quick stir to release any bubbles that might be in your jars. Now I'm going to turn my tool over and I'm going to check my headspace. Okay, now I'm going to clean the tops of my jars and we're going to place our lids on there. And I'm using Tattlers today. That's what I have on hand, so that's what I'm going to be using. Go ahead and grab those. They're a 2-piece. They have a rubber gasket or some kind of gasket there, and the top is plastic. I'm trying very hard not to touch the gasket or the top of the jar. You want that rubber gasket to be centered on your jars. Four-finger centers. Drop your band and place your finger on that lid. You can tighten it finger tight. If you feel like that band has moved though, you get it tight, back off a bit, and then retighten it. Just finger tight. And then we're going to drop them into our canner. This is what it looks like going into the canner. Just to kind of give you a look inside of my canner, this Bollington will hold 21 pints. It's already starting to steam around the edge, and I can set my timer for 40 minutes. So I did make one change to the recipe because my tomatoes were not as ripe as I would have liked them to be. So what I did is I added a cup and a half of 5% vinegar. I cleaned my jars with 5% vinegar to make sure that there's no food particles or nicks on top of my jars before I apply the lids and the bands. The bands hold the lids in place. That's their only purpose. When I pulled them out of the canner, I always check my bands to make sure that they're still on their finger tight. Most of the time, I don't have to do any twisting or turning or anything. I started doing that with the one-piece lids because I noticed that the one-piece lids would come loose, and then you'd get a faulty seal. So if you gently tighten them back up, your jar should seal properly. I got 18 pints out of a double batch, so that's really good. So 9 pints per batch, and that will cool on my counter here. And tomorrow morning I'll get up and I'll remove all my bands, check my seals, wash my jars, label them, and get them into the pantry. The product will settle in your jars when you pull them out. Let me grab one, I'll show you. Most tomato products does this. You'll see the liquid at the bottom and the tomatoes at the top. As they sit on your pantry shelf, that will settle. So don't worry if you see that. I did pull out a can of Rotel. The only difference between this Rotel and my homemade is I know exactly what I got in here. So Rotel contains tomatoes, water, chopped green chili peppers, less than 2% of salt, citric acid, calcium chloride, natural flavor, cilantro. So natural flavor, we don't know what that is, and cilantro. I added the onion because the recipe called for onion. It tastes just like Rotel to me when I did a little taste test earlier. Mine is hot, hot, hot. Because I left the seed in. I don't care anything about taking the seed out if I don't have to. These, I don't know how much these are in the store. We haven't bought any from a real grocery store in a long time. We do pick them up from the discount grocery occasionally, so I will use this product first, then I will go to my home canned when I need Rotel. These are 16-ounce jars. This is a 10-ounce can, so you're getting 4 ounces more per jar than you would get in the store. I think I've covered everything that I need to cover, so I want to thank y'all for coming along to March into Canning 25 and March Canning Madness 25. Thank you, Miss Lou Ann, for hosting your collaboration. All the information and the playlist will be linked below. And the recipe will be linked, at least what I have written down will be linked below as well. Thank you, my friends. Again, be blessed. Until the next time.